Welcome to Off Code, the show where we ignore the cultural codes and have real and intriguing conversations regarding the Black community and ways we can move forward to human flourishing.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Off Code. Man, it's been a minute. I am Monique Duson.
And I am
Sorry,
Kevin.
hold on, something that flew in my eye.
Oh, man. Already.
That was from the devil. Okay. Woo, all right, let's try it again.
Welcome to Off Code, the show where we ignore the cultural codes and have real and intriguing conversations regarding the Black community and ways we can move forward to human flourishing.
Hello, and welcome back to Off Code. It has been a minute. We are glad to be back with you all. I'm Monique Duson.
And I am Kevin Briggins, and I am really excited about this show. First of all, I'm excited to be back. I mean, it has been a long time.
It's been months. I think our last Off Code was when, in December? Before then, November?
It was. So we haven't been recording this year. And the reason was because you took a hiatus to write a book. So how is that going? Give us an update.
So Krista and I, my ministry partner at the Center for Biblical Unity, we are writing a book. We don't actually have a title for it. We have a working title, but we are answering 10 of the most common questions we've received in our ministry in regards to race. And so we are answering questions like, what is race? How did we become so divided? Should every church be multi-ethnic? What do you do with the multi-ethnic family in a conversation where things are so polarized, white and Black? So we are just taking time to write that out. I have one chapter left to write, and I'm going to take May to write it, and then we're going to submit our manuscript in June, and we're good. I mean, if anyone knows Krista, y'all know that she was done with her chapters like in early January, maybe late December. And if you know me, then you know I'm right on track. And so, yes, right on track, which is a little bit late, but we're good. Yeah. So yeah, it's been a good time to really focus on writing and really just focusing on, what are the important parts of the conversation, because we can't say everything. Yeah. What are the important parts of the conversation that we really want people to walk away with scripturally? Yeah. I think we hear the conversation from culture over and over again, but what does the Bible say about some of these questions or all of these questions? And, how should we as believers be participating with the topic of race? So there is that. And the book should be out in February.
Okay, good. Well, I just want to thank all of our listeners for just being patient while we have been on this hiatus. I know we've gotten a lot of feedback, a lot of questions. When y'all coming back? When y'all going to start again? So I just want to thank everybody for being so patient and excited to be back.
Yes. Thank you guys so much. What have you been up to?
Oh, man.
So you were off social media entirely.
I was. So I took a 90-day sabbatical from social media, TV, movies. I just kind of totally pulled away, totally unplugged, and really focused on the word, focused on Bible, prayer, family, all those things that are really important. And it was a good time. It was a time of what I would say renewal and just kind of rejuvenation. And I'm excited to be back, and I feel fueled and ready to go. So.
That's awesome. I love the fact that we're going to be talking about, like the Black father in this episode, and speaking with Brian Shannon regarding his book, Missing Pillars. But even you just saying, taking time away from social media and spending time in the Word just reminds me of, not just regarding Black men, but the man's role and responsibility in leading the family and what needs to be done in order to make sure that you lead well.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of distractions out there. I mean, we live in a society that is designed to keep us entertained and distracted. And sometimes you don't realize how much you are until you cut all those things out. And you realize you have a lot of time. You have a lot of free time once you cut all those things out of your life. And so it was a good time.
Wow. Well, glad that we are back. Let's bring Brian Shannon on. I want to call him Reverend Dr. Brian Shannon.
Rev, come on, Rev.
Rev Shannon. Now, I saw, and I'm going to continue to bring this up because I saw a live stream of him preaching. And I want to say it was a live stream of him preaching, or it might have been a still picture, but your shoes. I was like, yes. I was
preaching
like, yes,
in the J's.
Yes.
I preach in the J's. I admit.
Yes, we love the J's. Yes. And I did not send you, and I was like, are you preaching at some J's?
You did on Facebook.
Now, if you don't know what J's are Jordans from Michael Jordan, and that's all I know is that he makes tennis shoes and he was a basketball player, but you might be in my camp. So yes. Brian, introduce yourself and tell us, who are you? Where are you from? What is the project that the Lord has put on your heart?
Absolutely. First, let me say this, jumping on with you guys. Thank you for having me on. It is a pleasure. It is an honor to be on with you guys. I've been watching you guys for a little minute now and love your content and discourse on the show. And so I'm hoping that the conversation that I'm bringing will add to the conversation and discourse, as I mentioned, that you all have been having already about just, what's going on with the state of the Black community and how can we appeal to the word of God and moving forward. Okay. So I am a kid from Brooklyn, New York City, grew up in the streets of New York City up through the 80s. And so that was the crack cocaine, the height of the crack cocaine era in the 80s in New York. So I was there. 89, Do the Right Thing comes out, right? Coming to America, those are things, all of the things I'm thinking about. I remember, the mural, if you remember, you guys remember the Do the Right Thing movie? Because I'm about to take your card. I'm about to take your card. If you don't. It's in that meme when somebody said, look, you know that movie? Let me take your card. You don't know. So the Do the Right Thing movie. So my junior high school was actually right down the street. I would actually pass that Mike Tyson mural on the wall in the Do the Right Thing movie. That was my neighborhood, right? Wow. And so there was a Malcolm X mural out that way. And so that's why I came up. So my mother actually was in the recording industry. My mother was she was a singer in the music industry. She sang backup for Natalie Cole. This is way back. And she actually recorded in the disco era. And so, she was opening up for people like opening up for acts like the Jackson 5, for folks from Motown. And so my mother was in that scene. She ultimately, did a stint on an off-Broadway play. Y'all remember Mama I Want to Sing?
Yes.
Okay. So the original cast of Mama I Want to Sing, my mother was a part of. And so she was with that production for a little while. So lo and behold, we move out of the city. Okay. Life happens. We move out of the city. We move down to the South, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And so, while in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, that's when the Christian experience in my life and my mother's life and my life and my family actually sort of jump starts, right? Because my mom is going through intense struggles with her health. And so she gets radically saved. All right. And so at that time, my mom gives me the gospel. As a 17-year-old, I get saved. I got born again. I have a brother and a sister. And so ultimately they all came to faith as well. And so that starts my journey with the Lord. Okay. But my mom passes away. We're growing up fatherless. My mom was a single mother. Growing up in that, single parent issue, with that single parent issue at hand, and seeing all the pathologies that come along with that, the crime, the poverty and things of that nature, things that I talk about in my book. Okay. So, fast forward, I go to college, get a master's degree. I get into public education. I'm a school teacher at one point, and then becoming a school administrator. I get married, been married for 24 years, 2 children, and ultimately feel a call to ministry. God calls me to ministry, and I was doing a number of things like youth pastor, doing worship, evangelism, all kinds of things, just excited for the Lord. And then ultimately God gives me a call to full-time ministry. About a year ago, I resigned from from the public schools.
Okay, man, I appreciate that. One thing we didn't do before we introduced you was really set up your book and what your book is really about. Because I want people to really understand what this book is about and to read it. We were talking about it beforehand, and Mo and I both agreed that this is a book that everyone needs to read. Number one, it's well done and well written. It's well researched. But the book is titled Missing Pillars, and it is about the fatherless crisis within the Black community. And you do a great job of really kind of explaining it and laying out how we got to where we are today. Because I don't think a lot of people realize that this was not always the case.
Exactly.
Something happened at some point in history, brought us to this point to where over 70% of children are born to out of wedlock parents, to where only 30% of the Black community is married, to where only 1 in 5 women will get married in their lifetime. So something brought us to this point. Your book does a great job of kind of really laying that out. But before we get into that, kind of what made you decide to write this book?
Good question. So it was about 2019, 2020, where we started, we were getting to what the summer of love, right? we get to that point where social justice and the conversations around social justice are at a peak, really, with the George Floyd, death of George Floyd, things of that nature. And so what I began hearing amongst the conversations was, well, let's talk about what's really going on in the Black community. And then I would hear, sort of, I guess, gleanings and small talks about father absence. I kept hearing these buzzwords, father absence, father absence. And so I just began to reflect on my own life. And I said, well, I grew up without a father. Let me dive into this conversation and do a little bit of research to see how pervasive, how much of an issue is this really, this father absence issue. And so lo and behold, when I just began to even think about the anecdotes from my own life, growing up in the inner city context, in the urban context, I was saying, well, how many guys did I know growing up who had dads in the home, present, active, consistent dads? And they were few and far between, in my context, right? In the urban context. And so I thought about my, the block where I grew up in New York City, where I ended up, moving to South Carolina. We were still living in the projects. So we were in the projects in Section 8 housing down in the South. So still seeing the same pathology. And I'm thinking, who in my building had dads? Who in our neighborhood had dads? And about 3 out of every 4 dudes I knew did not have a present, active, consistent father in the home. So that brought me to this. About, 2022-ish, 2021, 2022-ish, I started compiling some data, compiling some research, and started writing. I said, I always wanted to write my own story, to talk about how the Lord, got a hold of my heart and captured me and did a work in my life that I escaped. Number one, the father absent poverty pathology, and it was through the gospel that in the church that, I came to the Lord and came to a saving knowledge of the Lord, but the Lord also taught me his principles, his ways, and I began to understand the importance of and have a growing passion for understanding the importance of family and why God instituted family, the nuclear family. And so, again, fast forward, I said, I want to write a book. I want to make it part my story, but I want to also unpack for people, like you said, how did we get here? Where does this come from? And I've heard lots of narratives. Was it slavery? I used to be one who used to think, well, because we were slaves, they broke our families up. It was America. It was the man. It was white supremacy. It was systemic racism. And then when I began to look at the data and the research and the facts, they didn't add up. It didn't go in that direction. And so there were a lot of other pieces that pointed to why this became an issue, and we could talk about that. So I started with the work of Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams, who codified in their writings that, listen, Black people in America were among the most conservative, family conservative people in our country in the early mid 1900s. Okay, post slavery, Civil War, post-Civil War, post Reconstruction, pre-civil rights. Blacks actually during the Great Depression actually led the nation in intact families and the nuclear families, fathers in the home. So I was saying, God, where did this issue begin? So then I got a hold of the Moynihan Report. So Daniel Patrick Moynihan was the Secretary of Labor for Lyndon B. Johnson, right? And so Patrick Moynihan wrote his report about the Negro family and how he saw at a time in the 60s, what was burgeoning about 65. He writes, he says, listen, 25% of black kids are growing up without dads. Houston, we have a problem. And I thought about that and I said, wow, Lord. So fast forward 1985, just 2 decades later, that number became 70 to 75%.
Yep.
Thomas Sowell said this. He said, listen, if we're talking about slavery and racism in America, why did it take over 100 years for this pathology to now take place? For this bomb to drop and the mushroom cloud, so to speak, the metaphorical mushroom cloud that destroyed the family, why did it take 100 years for it to happen? He said there was a time, from 1930s to the 1950s, 1960s, black poverty was on a decline. It went from 87% to 47%. And then over the next 10 years, it went down another 18 to 20%. So black poverty was way on a decline. The black family was way intact. Then it started happening to about the 1960s, mid 1960s, right when the civil rights movement is happening. There was some strange things going on that impacted the black community. So, and then from there it took off. So what happened? It was what Walter Williams said. He said this. He said the welfare state did to the black family what slavery, Jim Crow, or the harshest racism could never do, and that was to destroy the black family by systematically removing the man out of the home.
That everything that I read, everything that I like, when I'm looking at what has happened to the black family, all of what you're saying, it's all right there. I mean, even going back to like the black family, but the black man, and black people in the workforce and all of that, even right after slavery, before the official institution of Jim Crow, right after slavery, you saw black people in legislative office. And so what was you going to say? Go ahead.
No, are you guys familiar with the work of Robert Woodson?
Yes.
Yeah, with the 1776 Project at the Woodson Center. So Woodson and their research, they have papers and research in which they talked about how there was there were census and data that was taken based on the plantations in the South. They took data samples from various plantations in the South right out of slavery, and they found out that 80 to 85% of the families, the black families coming out of slavery, had a father in the home and were intact right out of slavery. So slavery didn't break us up. In fact, blacks were flocking to keep their families back together after slavery was abolished.
Yes.
Why? Because they knew that there was, slave, trading and things like that, and slaves being transported and slaves being plucked up and taken out of their families. And there was some dismantling of families through slavery, but those slaves found their spouses. There were people who were flocking to marriage because marriage was an institution. There was Judeo-Christian values that they clung to, and it was the opposite. They were clinging to the institution of marriage. We were doing that.
Yes. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. I feel like this can go down a whole.
It can. But
But I feel like this y'all show. I'm here. I'm here as the woman, but y'all, the conversation of this missing pillars in our community and the different communities around America that are primarily black, all black. This conversation has to be had. So
and so you asked this question. Said, well, also, why did I write it? One of the impetus of why I wrote was when I saw this statistic right here. So two other things. So not only Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams's work, Robert Woodson's work, but Barack Obama said this, and I don't quote Obama a whole lot. when I don't quote 44 a whole lot. However, he said this in 2008, on the rise to, his rise to presidency. He was in a Chicago church, and Father's Day, the famous Father's Day speech, he said, a kid growing up without a dad is 5 times more likely to be born in poverty, 9 times more likely to have problems in school, and 20 times more likely to be in the prison system.
Yep.
And so I spent 20 years as a public educator, both as a teacher and an administrator. And when I heard the narratives, that was the school system was a hub for the whole social justice conversation. I saw all of that taken care of, like, the students, are you blaming the victim if you're saying that they getting suspended because of their behavior as opposed to the fact that they Black, this, that, and the third of the school to prison pipeline? And I said, all of that is hogwash.
Right.
I'm telling you, all of that is hogwash. I'm telling you. So I've actually done studies in urban education, and actually I was trained as an urban educator, as an urban school principal to turn around failing schools. And so I've been all a part of that conversation about analyzing data with regard to suspension rates and all that. But what they fail to recognize, and they fail to ever mention and to include in the conversation in the data that they never consider, is the father absence rate in the Black community and how it directly correlates to not only the prison system, but to the behavior issues in schools. All of the data and research says that kids growing up without dads have behavior health issues, have mental health issues. They are 5 times more likely to be, or 3 to 4 times more likely to have ADHD and have an IEP. Okay. And so all of these things are, again, directly linked back to the father in the home, because oh man, there's a whole bunch of, the research base is crazy in terms of how kids with a father actually have more discipline. Kids with a father regulate emotions better. You know what I'm saying? All of the research says this. And so I'll be glad
because y'all give the look. Like, so I was with, and I'm going to use Kevin as an example, but I was with Kevin. And now I remember this from last year when we were at camp. And he brought his whole family. Shalonda was awesome. And the girls have a different relationship, I feel like, with Shalonda. Because when Kevin walked in and he just say a name. It's no huffing and puffing, no nothing. But they cling to Kevin too.
Yep.
And so you can see it, and not to take anything away from Shalonda or to say if there was anything wrong, because there wasn't. But you just see
it's a different relationship. There is.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of what I wanted to kind of touch on, because you name your book Missing Pillars, right? And when I think of a pillar, I think of something that's strong. It's stabilizing. It's holding up some structure. Why do you call fathers pillars?
Good question. So like I'm just gonna I'll take a little make a little connection here with this. So I think about even just regulating emotions, how people learn to regulate emotions. Fathers actually teach children how to stabilize emotionally. You look at a young man who grows up without a dad, often I can just look at the anecdotes from my school, leadership experience and school work experience. Kids without dads fought 10 times more than kids with dads. They were in fights because they simply had a hard time regulating emotion. A father helps you to regulate emotions by one, modeling and helping you, by modeling how we don't just fly off the handle and I'm not saying that there aren't men who don't fly off the handle, but a responsible, present, active, consistent father in the home helps kids do that, because most men don't emote the way that, and this is not a put down, and it's not a misogynistic statement, but we don't emote the way women do.
So you trying to say I got suspended at least 3-4 times grade level? So I had no daddy in my house. What you trying to say?
Look, the data speaks. No,
because I still think it's been mad. Go ahead. I'm just gonna sit here and listen. Find out something about my own life.
So you can see how fathers active fathers in the life of children, the data speaks that those children regulate emotion differently, because men typically, I'm not saying that in every case it's the truth, but men typically emote differently, and we rationalize and think through conflict differently when we are, emotionally healthy, put it that way. Okay. And so that man in that situation does that. So outside of that, let me read this for you. Just a little quote. So Charles A. Ballard, I don't know if you're familiar with him. Charles A. Ballard, he was a part of my research, but he was the founder and the president of the Institute for Responsible Fatherhood and Family Revitalization. He said this: fatherless is linked to the increase in murders, assaults, drive-by shootings, drug and alcohol abuse, Fatherlessness is the cause of teenage pregnancy, infant mortality, suicide, neglect, and abandonment. Fatherlessness is the root cause of truancy, education failure, and community failure, and despair. Fatherless, if left unchecked and uncorrected, will lead to the demise of our American society as we know it. And so, do I believe that was a strong statement by Charles Ballard? Now, my Christian worldview says to me that sin is at the root of all evil. Sin is at the root of all pathologies. However, I absolutely agree that the father absent, sin issue is at the root of that it contributes strongly, and it makes a major impact on all of those things that he mentioned. And so removing the father from the home, I believe, is like removing the spine out of the back of a human being, because that spine keeps it erect. Your spine keeps you erect and walking straight. It helps you to stabilize and hold your body up, hold your head up, right? And so that your head is on straight. I'm not saying that a woman can't run a household. I had a single mom, right? I'm not saying that women can't hold the home together, can't hold a family together, because we have very matriarchal-led families, that are held together. I'm not saying that, right? However, and when we look at what God instituted with the heteronormative nuclear family, that he put the father at the head. He said the order is this: it is Christ the head of man, God the head of Christ, Christ the head of man, man the head of the woman. And that is the order of God.
Amen. I can amen that.
Right? There's something to, your point of, this isn't misogynistic. This isn't putting down,
right,
women-led households and things like that. But at the same time, there are consequences to sin.
Amen.
And there is a way that God has designed for life to be walked out on this earth. Now, there might also be a way that he will allow, but what he allows may not always be according to his specific design.
Absolutely.
And when God has designed the family, you don't have to believe us. You can go back to Genesis 1, go to Genesis 2, go looking as to how God designed the family unit and what that means for the human person.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking about his design, we find that in the book of Genesis.
Amen.
Now, when we talk about the impacts of sin, or, because yes, you're right, at the foundation, it's all sin. Yeah. We are a sinful people, and this is why we get sexual promiscuity. This is why we get, fatherless households. This is what, and yes, some fatherless households occur because unfortunately a father died.
Yeah.
But that isn't, I feel like, still God's design for the family.
Yep, absolutely. And so one of the things that I mentioned in my book is that, again, I had a strong woman who held my family down, right? And I think a lot of us can relate to that, where there was a Ma dear, who held the family down, who held the family together, right? And so there's that mother, that matriarchal figure, right? You know what I'm talking about. Yep. And so that's the story of a lot of us, but that's an exception and not God's rule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so God blesses families in spite of, not because of. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep. He blesses us in spite of the fact that fathers left the home, but that's not the reason that we are blessed. The reason, in other words, the reason we thrive in those situations, God has mercy, God has grace, and God, and by the power of the Holy Spirit and the Word of God, many of us found the gospel, right? And it was the church that came in and filled in the gaps, right? And plugged the holes, and stood in the gap, right? And bridged the gap for a lot of the things that we needed. And that was my story, how I talked about how men in the church came alongside me, right? My pastor and individuals taught me about manhood, and so there were a lot of things that I still had to learn and went lacking on, but that I had to learn through experience and hard, and falling down on my face and making mistakes. But I thank God for the men who came around me, surrounded me when my mother passed away, and while my mother was alive. So that, I actually saw and attached to my psyche, that this is what family looks like. I see men holding it down. I see men raising their kids. I see this man where he's in the bathroom changing his daughter's diaper and goes back out and sit down with his wife at church. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, oh, this is what it's about. This is what I want. And so that was the absolute Lord. However, what I mentioned is that we don't want to build society based on exceptions. We want to build society based on the rule, because if we do that, then it's like would you just because you can how many of you have rolled around on a donut on the side of your car until you got your tire fixed? You know what I'm saying? You roll around on a donut. You say, okay, rolling around on a donut is going to get you from point A to point B in a short, over a short distance. But over a long haul, that's not going to sustain you. And you don't want to continue trying to roll on a donut for a year. No, you can't do it.
Joker start wiggling. Y'all know.
You can't roll on a donut for a year. So what you ultimately had to do was to, okay, so it got you over, but what you want to do is we build cars not based on donuts. We build cars based on full tires, right? Yeah. And 4 of them, 4 full tires, right? And idealistically, 4 tires that match. You know what I mean? And so in our society, we want to say, okay, if we're going to see some of the issues and the pathologies in the Black community and all of our communities, not even just the Black community, but you can go somewhere in the Appalachians where you see a certain pathology too. You know what I'm saying? You can go some folks down south. I was on a podcast with a brother. He lives out in Kentucky, white brother, he's in the Lord. And, he's like, look, he said, I see some of these pathologies out here in the trailer parks out here where I live out in Louisville. He says, folk that look like me and, they live in reckless. They live in, ratchet, He said, look, ain't no minorities out there, where he talking. And so anyway, so again, we want to look at and examine what has God said about what promotes and sustains life at the level that he designed, like you said, Monique, that he designed it to, and then we'll see flourishing at a higher rates and higher levels when we begin to get back to what God said.
Yeah. Look at you, ratchetness is colorblind. I need a shirt that's just painted.
Oh, that's another off-color shirt. Yes,
it is. Ratchetness is colorblind. Yes, but I think you bring up a good point, like hillbilly culture and hood culture.
Now, have you read Thomas Sowell's book on Black rednecks?
White liberals and Black
rednecks?
Yep.
Yes. Listen, that wasn't even our culture. Mm-hmm. That actually, that whole culture of I'll fight you, we violent, and this, that, and this craziness, ratchetness, that actually came from, Southern redneck culture.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other, but man, that's an awesome book. I did the audio book of it, but because, I'm a slow reader, but yeah, I was like, wow, man, he's dropping, wow. Yeah. That's interesting points. That's because good stuff.
We now, and do we call that appropriation? Because we own that.
Wow.
We own it.
Wow.
We be quick to be like, you can have these hands. Right. Is that really our culture?
Is that really our culture? Exactly. Wow. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I'm just asking the question. I'm just here on y'all show. Go ahead.
No, I'll say this because I think we fall into this trap sometime because number one, we love our mothers.
Yep.
And we love our grandmothers. We love Big Mama now.
Yep.
But in doing so and in praising their effort and in lifting them up, and even like you said, no, a woman can hold a household together. And in doing that, we almost make men insignificant.
Right.
Because we praise them so much for all that they're doing. We make it seem as if men are really optional because a woman can't do it. You know? And I think in our community, that's almost how we've gone about things. Men are optional. Fathers are optional. It's cool if you're around, but other than financial support, what do I need him for?
Right.
And so I've seen a lot of that, and I think it's just so much about our affections for our mothers that we make our fathers seem insignificant, and there's been a pattern of that. I want to go back.
We can't just skip on past that. Go ahead, Brian.
So, Kevin, you bring up a great point because, again, let's get back to what has fueled a lot of the father-absent pathology that we're seeing right now. So I mentioned the welfare state. So I hate to say that there's like, I'll never believe that one particular thing, creates all of what we see, right? Yeah. There's only one thing we could point to. There's several things. I think the singular most impactful thing was the welfare state. However, you had some other things going on at the time that made the welfare state a perfect storm.
Yep.
And that was, number one, the feminist movement. The feminist movement. So the whole idea, I don't need no man. So think about what happened in the welfare state. The government comes in. what some people call, I was on April Chapman's show, Stand Up.
Don't be talking about her on this show.
And she said Zaddy government. She called it Zaddy government. And Zaddy came in and they said, okay, we will give you a check if there's no man in the house. And we were talking about the movie Claudine.
Yeah.
Remember Claudine?
Yep.
And so James Earl Jones, he was like, yo, look, get your stuff out of here, man. You know, get your shoes, you know, get your hat. You know, you can't have no traces of a man in here. And that was such a real thing. And so the government was coming through, had spot checkers to make sure there was no man in the house. And if there was no man in the house, you can get that check, right? And so Walter Williams said this. He said, any knowledgeable economist knows this. If you know anything about how the economics works, he said, anything that you tax something, if you subsidize something, you get less of it. If you subsidize something, you get less of it. If you tax something, you get taxed. I'm sorry. Let me get it right. So if you tax something, you get less of it. If you subsidize something, you get more of it. And he said what the government began to do is subsidize slovenly behavior. And so men saw that as an incentive to not stick around. They were like, yo, free love. So what was also happening in the 60s and 70s? Free love, right? Sexual revolution. Everybody's like, do a little dance, make a little love, get down tonight. So that was
Kevin, he don't know that song.
That was the culture, right? And so that's the culture feeding into this ideology of, oh, the government will come in and just take care of that. Okay, cool. Drop that off. Keep it moving, homie. Papa was a Rolling Stone. So then you have that going on, right? And so they just drop them off and not taking care of kids. And then lo and behold, you had a generation where you had a boom and an explosion from, man, and remember what I said earlier, 1965, 25% of black kids had no dads in the nation. 2 decades later, just 2 decades, it tripled. It tripled. Feminist movement. I don't need no man, no way. Sexual revolution. Let's just all give away love for free. Okay? And then incentivization of the government. We're subsidizing slovenly behavior. And so all of those things fueled the father absence pathology that we see. So I just want to make sure I brought that point up.
No, you're right. And you touched on, I just want to hit so people really understand. There was really a rule called a no man in the house rule. And the government literally had people that would go around the check to make sure that woman did not have a man in the house. And if she didn't, she got the check. And so it incentivized women, not just incentivized, it encouraged them not to have a man in the house, not to get married, just to have single kids. And then they give you a check per kid. Like they were subsidizing this behavior. And I saw you on the April show. I'm sorry, Mo. I say April. But what made it hit hard, because on her show, you quoted a quote from Lyndon B. Johnson about the importance of family. And that quote, then his policy did not align. He talked about the importance of family being the pillar of our nation and our communities and all this stuff. But then his policy encouraged people, the black community especially, not to have families.
Yeah, let me give you that quote, Kev. Is that okay? Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
So that quote, he said, the family is the cornerstone of our society. More than any other force, it shapes the attitudes, the hopes, the ambitions, and the values of the child. And when the family collapses, it is the children that are usually damaged. When it happens on a massive scale, the community itself is crippled. So unless we work together to strengthen the family, to create conditions under which most parents will stay together, all the rest, schools and playgrounds and public assistance and private concerns, will never be enough to completely cut the circle of despair and deprivation. And lo and behold, isn't it ironic that his policies undermine everything he just said?
Yep. So, I mean, you can think what you want, but my mind goes to immediately was this intentional?
Was it intentional?
And I don't know how it couldn't have been, because you weren't ignorant of the importance of family and what that affects on children and communities. But then you create a policy where you encourage women not to have men in the house. And you pay them not to.
And that's why I said, I think I might have mentioned this. It might have been a slip of the tongue, but I said there was a systematic incentivization of men not to be in the home.
Yeah. And so, like I said, it was all these forces happening at one time. And just to rehash the timeline, out of slavery, 85% of Black families intact. Even through the Great Depression, the Black families are leading the charge. You got the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s.
Poverty
going down.
At the greatest rate that it has in history for Blacks.
Something started to change around the 60s, right? And so 1965, so remember you got Jim Crow, the Civil Rights Act, 1964, 1965. So Blacks kind of get this, I guess you say, freedom to an extent, right? There's full rights, full citizenship.
Right. Now, there's also another thing that we can add to, again, not just one thing is a core issue, and then there was all these other things fueling it. There was a lot of Blacks migrating to the urban sectors, right? A lot of Blacks migrating to the urban sector. What's happening? They're getting away from the Bible Belt. And so I remember Walter Williams saying that there was a time when, you had, Black women, you down south, you got pregnant, what they do?
They send you away.
They send you away. It was some shame associated with that. And then he said we started, there was no shame and social ostracism associated with pregnancy anymore. So that was kind of symbolic of the idea that people were getting away and breaking loose from the values that they had learned, the Judeo-Christian values. But, when they went to the city, they're like, look, it's about to be on. And so people were breaking away from what they had been taught in the urban. And so here's the other thing about Patrick Moynihan that people don't understand. Patrick Moynihan also mentions, he said, listen, y'all, because they was calling him racist and they were saying he was blaming the victim. So he was saying, well, listen, I grew up without a dad in the Irish community. Patrick Moynihan grew up fatherless too. His father abandoned the home. I don't know if it was he abandoned the home or his father died, but there was a point in time where his father was not in the home, and he grew up fatherless. And he saw in the Irish community the explosion, and he actually documents this in the Moynihan report, that there was a similar pathology happening in the Irish community, where they saw crime on the rise, they saw poverty, and all these other things that were linked to father absence.
Wow, and I think that really is important to highlight, because while we talk about the issues that are impacting the Black community, a lot of these issues overlap because sin doesn't know color. Exactly. And so when you look at sin and the impacts of sin, you're going to get the result. Regardless of what your color is. So if we are not walking in accordance with God's design, there's going to be impact regardless of what your color is.
Absolutely. So Kevin, you started to say something. I cut you off.
No, good. I just wanted to, for the listeners to understand the timeline of what we're talking about to how we got to this point. So 1965, the Moynihan report comes out because the fatherless rate is at 25%. 25%. He said, this is a crisis. We got to stop this, right?
Nip it in the bud.
Nip it in the bud. And that was 1965. 1965, also Civil Rights Act. So 25% is a crisis. So post-Civil Rights Act, post-slavery, post-Jim Crow, Jim Crow doesn't exist anymore. We go from 25% to 75% in 2 decades, in 20 years. We cannot sit here today and blame slavery and Jim Crow for that. Right? Something else. And I'll say this too, because I'm so sick of hearing it. We can't blame redlining. Redlining did not make your daddy leave.
Maybe it was whiteness.
So listen. No, go ahead, Kev.
No, I'm just saying, because they have to come up with something after Jim Crow, and it's always redlining, right? That don't explain what's going on, man.
No, because again, so, Thomas Sowell's point is, why do we see at the start of the 20th century, at the end of that century, you see different effects, but you had more happenings of what should have impacted father absence happening earlier on, but the effect didn't happen until the latter part. And what actually correlates more so with that was government intervention.
Yes.
Government intervention. It wasn't the racism. It wasn't slavery. It wasn't because we, Rob, I love this about Robert Woodson. He says this every time I hear his talks. He says, listen, when whites were at their worst, blacks were at their best. Listen, we had the Harlem Renaissance going on. Mm-hmm. There were Black Wall Streets all over the nation. We like to talk about the Tulsa, but there were Black Wall Streets going on all over the nation. There were several blacks right out of slavery who died millionaires. Imagine that. Uh-huh. Imagine that. Blacks right out of slavery who died millionaires. They were when they were putting barriers up and forcing us out and segregating us out of schools, no school access and access to public spaces. We created our own. We built the Wallahaji Hotel. You know what I'm saying? We built our own bus companies. Yep. And what tore those things down? We talk about, generational wealth. You know what destroyed generational wealth? Government intervention. Government intervention. Because had the Civil Rights Act, and Robert Woodson brings out this point, and I never thought about it the way that he talks about it. But he said, listen, when we talk about, we thought we weren't doing well until we were going to school with white folks. Mm-hmm. We weren't doing well until we could sit on the bus with white folks. Meanwhile, we had our own schools that were outdoing white schools. Mm-hmm. We had our own businesses and we had our own buses. And so what happened when we had to sit on the bus with white folks, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying, I love my white brothers and sisters. Praise God for us, all together, loving each other. However, he said, listen, that destroyed Black wealth. Because our businesses and our hotels and our things disintegrated because we were no longer patronizing them.
Yep. Yeah. And that's something that people don't realize of. And I think that's why the best people on these issues are economists. Whether it's Walter Williams, whether it's Thomas Sowell, or whether it's Glenn Lowry, because they understand kind of supply and demand and what drives these things, right? The fact that Black people were segregated and forced out of, white spaces meant that Black people were forced to create and produce their own, and they did, and they thrived, right?
We were at our best, man.
Yeah, but once they were no longer forced, and once integration was legally, pushed and forced, though that self-resilience, that self-sustainment, it went away. It went away. And now instead of shopping at the Black-owned grocery store down the street, you're going over to the big box store owned by the white person or whoever, right? And so Black businesses suffered because Black people were no longer the dollar. The things we talk about now, you got Killer Mike, all these people talk about what do you do with the Black dollar, keep it in the community. Mm-hmm. Well, what do you think was happening prior to this? Right. And now they're trying to get the same prescription all these years later. It's like, no, you gave that up.
We give it up. And we like to point to, we tried to build our own businesses and they destroyed it and they killed us in Tulsa, Oklahoma, so forth and so on. But listen, it wasn't them because, I saw you guys had Chad Jackson on the show. Tulsa was rebuilt, baby. That didn't destroy Tulsa. And there was many Black Wall Streets, as I said, going on across the country. But what really destroyed Black efficacy, Black economic efficacy in our country was government and government reliance and the democratic leftist ideal of depend more on government. That drove people away from the mindset of self-governance, self-efficacy, and doing for self, and entrepreneurship and innovation. And we started looking to government to take care of us. Listen, we became scientists, man. We became, Booker T. Washington, we built our own schools, man. We were building our own businesses. And then the moment we said, no, but we need to be, we need to be sitting next to, we didn't think our children were going to do well unless they were sitting next to the white kids in class. And again, thank God for Dr. King's dream in that respect, that we could be, with, one and together in unity. Praise God for it. However, I don't buy into this idea that our kids can't excel if they're not sitting next to somebody with white skin.
That man.
This is the way I always put it. We gained our civil rights, but at what cost? At what cost did we gain it? And I think the strategies used to push it do it now. We need it now. I think there were some unintended consequences.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we need to face up to the fact that we might have ourselves in the foot.
Yep.
Because we hitched our ride to something, right? And you talk about the Democratic Party. We hooked, not even about which party we hooked ourselves to. It's the fact that we hooked ourselves to politics, right? And politics became the solution for everything and so it became, as I forgot who said, we went from a trying people to a crying people. We just started complaining and crying and whining and give us, do right by us, and that still kind of continues today.
Yeah.
And so, and I know that we kind of got off on the economics.
Wait, I got something I want to say. Hold on.
Okay, my bad.
Go ahead.
Okay, good. Well, I want to clear something up for people who are listening who might not hear exactly what the heart of it is that we're not saying, down with, desegregation and things like that. But we are saying that segregation or that desegregating our nation had other costs that people might not have been expecting. So that was just the one of the things that I wanted to clear up before somebody write in, because it's gonna come to my inbox.
Right.
I'll give an example where most people can understand.
Go ahead.
The biggest example is Chinatown, right? If Black people had their own version of Chinatown, nobody says Chinatown is wrong or bad because it's not integrated into a white society or whatever. No, they have a self-sustaining they have their own banks. They have their own economic system, and the Jewish community does the same thing, right? I was in Dallas last year, and I saw this building, all these. I was like, "What is this?" My brother's like, "Oh, this is the Korean side of town. That's the Korean bank, right?" So you have these communities that have their own internal, self-sufficient economic systems, right, where they loan money to each other and their projects, and it all flows and stays within the community. That's all we were saying used to happen within the Black community,
Right. Yep. It was,
and it went away.
Right. And it wasn't because of racism.
Yeah. And a lot of the, like I say, really pro-Black people today are advocating for those things once again, acknowledge lost them in the first place. That's the key. They don't acknowledge that we made efforts because, and I've heard, people like Malcolm X and some other like really pro-Black people talk about this, is that Black people started to idolize white people, and they wanted what white people had was better than what we had, and all these types of things. And like I said, and this was people like Malcolm X saying they were noticing these things that Black people were simply running after things they thought were held up by white people. It was idolizing white people.
And primarily there was this idea that we had to occupy the same space in order to feel equal.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? And to occupy the same space in order to feel equal and spend our money in the same place in order to feel equal. You know what I'm saying? And there was this departure from spending our money in a way that said, listen, okay, again, we had Black buses where we could sit wherever we want. They were even, so why weren't, think about over 2 decades and 3 or 4 decades, if Black buses, had self-sustaining economic, support. Black banks, Black business all over the place. You know what I'm saying? And so we would have exactly like what you said, Kevin. But so listen, can we segue with this? So back to the father absence conversation, because we haven't really departed from it. We were just kind of giving some context. Things with regard. There you go. So chapter 4 of my book, I talk about the perfect storm. There are 3 things so I talk about the perfect storm that actually fueled the father absence pathology early on from the 60s, right? And you recapped it beautifully, Kevin. But then moving forward, what's still fueling the father absence issue right now? And I talk about 3 things in the book. So number 1, I said it's pop culture. So I believe pop culture is one of the things that's fueling the father absence issue. So what's coming through the airwaves? Television, media, music, all of these things. What's coming through the airwaves? It's hatred for men. You talked about the MCU earlier, Kevin, and how that's becoming a platform that's man-hating. Quite honest with you. And so we seeing things that are coming through the culture like Keke Palmer. Look, y'all, I'm pregnant. Ain't not married. Nick Cannon. Look, man, I got my 21st child. Not married. Right? What's promoted through the music? Sexual irresponsibility. what's pandered through by the left, by the left when it comes to to voting. So they had the whole no voting, no VUCKING, no bucking with a V. They're using ratchetness and sexual irresponsibility to promote voting. Why? Because they're appealing to a culture of of an expectation, a low expectation, which is bigotry, right? That's the real bigotry. I don't even call that soft bigotry. That's like actual bigotry of low expectations. You can't help but to have babies out of wedlock. You can't help but to have socially irresponsible sexual activity. You can't help it.
All y'all are naked and shaking your tail. That's what's going to appeal to you.
That's what you do. That's who you are. And for us to come in and try to say anything or to impose any other ideas or values or ideals would be racist of us, wouldn't it?
It would internalize racism. And according to Biden, are you even black if you don't go along with that?
There you go, right? So this whole racial pandering and this gerrymandering to the culture. So pop culture is fueling this father absence pathology. Number two,
this whole podcast is nothing but whiteness. I just want to point that out.
It is.
Y'all got that internalized. Y'all got that internalized racism, man. Come on now. And so the second thing is, and we can unpack these if to whatever extent you want.
No, go ahead.
The second thing is woke ideology, leftist ideology. Woke ideology. And here's one of the reasons why I said woke leftist ideology. Because number one, again, there's this narrative that says if you have anything to say to the black community, I love what Larry Elder said. Larry Elder was another guy that I listened to a lot, right? Because he's been talking about the father absence, black father absence and so forth. He's one of the folks that kind of fueled that, the desire in me to kind of go dig deeper into the data. But Larry Elder said, listen, black people in America have become, these children to whom the truth cannot be told. We can't say nothing, reflective, introspective, about what the black community should do to improve, because that's internalizing whiteness, that's racist, that's blaming the victim. And so that's all perpetuated by the left. So you're in a position where you can't even try to be self-reflective and assess your situation, by determining whether or not you actually are a victim or whether or not you do have the ability and the power to think outside of leftist black thinking, right? Blackness. We don't even talk about blackness enough, but blackness. What is blackness? You ain't black. You won't vote for me. You ain't black. What is that? Like you vote a certain way, you think a certain way, you act a certain way. And so to go outside, to veer away from that and to actually think about what that means and say, well, no, it ain't one way to be black. Obama said that too. There's more than one way to be black. And we've gotten away from that, right? And so the left keeps blacks in America, and their goal and their aim is to keep blacks in America pigeonholed in that kind of thinking that says you can't be self-reflective. You have to see yourself as a victim, victimology. You know what I'm saying? And so again, that's stifling our growth. That's stifling our growth because we don't even look. So here's one thing I said: if you always see yourself as a victim, and it's always somebody else's fault, you'll never develop the self-efficacy to deal with your own sin, right? And you'll always be dependent upon some other agent outside of you for your solution, government. And so they want you stuck in that, right? And so number two is woke leftist ideology that's keeping us stuck in this pattern, because you can't even talk about the issue of fathers because that's blaming the victim. Number three, it's the sexual revolution and gender ideology. That's still also a field.
Come on, because I can also go on this one.
You know what I'm saying? Because one, you redefine what a man is. We don't have a definition of manhood anymore. Who's going to become a father?
Yep.
Who's going to become a daddy?
Or true manhood and masculinity is called toxic.
There you go.
And when you redefine masculinity, or you call it toxic, you redefine what a man is. What does that do for the woman? It creates something in us where we have to step up in a way that we should have never had to step up. But that started, with the feminist movement overall, and especially me growing up in the 90s and hearing all of the, you don't need a man, all of that. But today for a black girl or any girl, regardless actually of color, it's like when you have a different definition of what it means to be a man, your definition of what it means to be a woman is also going to change. And nobody wants to really talk about that, but it has to. Because we only have male and female.
Preach, Mo. See, this is why I said you need to be on this conversation.
I'm just saying. We need to talk about what does it mean, especially as y'all were talking about earlier, like the feminizing of like what does the MCU stand for? Not the multicultural universe. The
Marvel Cinematic Universe.
The Marvel, like, and all that. And I had brought it up because I just watched Black Panther Wakanda Forever. And when there's not an absence of men in the movie. Like they're there, but they not there.
There's an absence of significant men.
Yes, there's an absence, to me, of significant men. And the ones that are quote unquote significant are just blaming white people for everything.
Yep.
So it's
colonizers.
The colonizers. So but then in the movie, because the chief male has died, and I feel like this is representative of the Black community. The man has now died. He has departed. What does that leaves the woman to come up. But then what did you see in the movie? The main girl, what's her name? Sriracha, what's her name?
Shuri.
Yeah, sorry.
She went Sriracha. Look, you think about the wings you had yesterday.
Yeah, it's about that time. I'm not gonna lie. She like just indecisive or trying to find her way and get like there's this, I don't want to call it a promotion of like African spiritualism or investigating with the ancestors and all this. But it's like this is, it wasn't your role, boo.
And notice how she was emotionally indecisive.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
That emotional indecisive and again, women leadership has its place. Female leadership has its place in the sector of our society. However, when you talk about, you go back to ancient Israel, where God spoke to Israel, he said, listen, he told Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, he said, listen, your women and your children rule over you because the men of the nation forsook the law of God and priests got out of position. And so when that happened, he said, children are your oppressors and your women rule over you. And that's when the society was out of balance because they left the law of God, the order of God. And so, again, when you leave truth, there goes the rest of society. There goes the rest of the home. There goes the rest of the community, right? The nation.
Yeah. And it's ironic that our culture, it attacks what they call the patriarchy and it praises the matriarchy. They praise the women leadership, right? And so it is a complete reversal of God's design. And that's what the world is promoting. And as a community, unfortunately, we felt the brunt of that.
Yeah.
Kevin, you said something earlier that I want to circle back to because it really got me thinking. I might have been a little bit in my emotions. So, maybe I shouldn't have said nothing. But you were like, as a community, we tend to be very matriarchal. We tend to praise our moms and big mamas and Medeas and things like that. And that perhaps has created a space where all of this celebration is focused on the woman, but then there's no celebration or thought, like the man becomes an afterthought. And it's almost like the question of, well, do we even need him? And I think that question is, I think your point is very valid. We are asking that question of where, like, do I need you? I think that's one of the questions that welfare introduced and things like that. But do you think that it's the celebration of women, like really, like was it because we celebrated our moms and our grandmas like that, or that men kind of opted out, or maybe is it a little bit of both? Because I kind of feel like
I think it's a little bit of both. But I'm saying that in the celebration of she can do it all by herself, we made men irrelevant.
Yep.
Because we praised her so much for doing it all by herself. What are men really for then?
But I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence of like, would there if men hadn't opted out, would we have even had the need for the celebration? You know what I mean? Like it had to start somewhere. And I'm like, did it start with the woman? Did it start with the man? Was it like a joint conversation? I feel like Tupac addresses this in one of his songs. But go ahead, Brian.
So I think it starts with the departure of the man, right? So when men get out of position in a society, again, so goes the rest of the family, so goes the rest of society. And then women will respond to what men are doing. And so then it became, so it's like this. Let me make this correlation. Maybe this might be seen far left to some people. So critical race theory, and you're like, where did this come from? Okay, but just listen, hear me out. Critical race theory is a overreaction to a real problem. Right? Yeah. Feminism is an overreaction, an out-of-pocket overreaction to an actual problem. Right? So men were getting out of position. Men stopped supporting the home like they should. Men were being slovenly, right? And took opportunities to bounce and to bail. So and also men, men were being, were being domineering in a lot of ways and taking advantage of women, abusive of women. And so the response was, Satan says, okay, the enemy of the soul says, okay, let me give you this response, but I'm going to make it an unnatural, inordinate response to a real problem. And it's going to take you on the deep end. Right. And so that's the same thing that critical race theory does for us. It tells you, everybody, all white people racist. Right. It tells you, it gives you the most extreme responses to a problem. And it seems plausible in your mind because of an actual problem that it's responding to. And so when we said, in our culture, it was celebrate moms at all costs. Like you see a guy celebrating at a football field. He's like, look, mom. He's like, I want to give a shout out to my moms. Nobody ever shouts out their dad. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? At a sporting event. They always shout out their moms. They always talk about how they got their moms a house. Yeah. Nobody ever talks about what they did for their father, because oftentimes their father either wasn't there or they've been conditioned to believe he was insignificant because of the role that was the diminished role that he played.
That's a good point. Even now, all the way down to we get mom's Father's Day cards. Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Kevin, you look highly offended by that position.
No, it's the reality. It is. We joke about it, the difference between what we do for Mother's Day and what we do for Father's Day. Mother's Day is a big deal. Father's Day is maybe a card, and that card might go to mama. And so, no, it's just the reality of where we are at this point. So this is my question, Brian, because man, you've done a good job of laying it out, how we got here, what the problem is today, what continues to push it, right? Pop culture, wokeness, all these things. What do we go from here? What's the solution? How do we overcome where we are?
So number one, for me, it was, so look at going back to the subtitle of my book. So America's Black Father Absence Crisis and how the Christian church helped me overcome it. I think this starts with the church. I think the church, we have to get back to a steady stream, a steady diet of sound doctrine around the theology of the family, God's view of the family, the biblical worldview of the family. And we have to robustly present this, particularly in our day. We need to turn the volume up on that, particularly in our day, because the family is being undermined. The family is being attacked directly, right? What is a man? What is a woman? Nuclear family, right? You go back to the BLM manifesto. We want to what? Dismantle the heteronormative nuclear family, right? And so the church has to do that. Now, I think what also has to happen along with that is, we have to take it outside of the four walls of the church into our communities and our homes. And we're going to have to disciple and train people. We're going to have to disciple this generation. We're going to have to bring God's antidote, right? I didn't mean to say anecdote, but God's antidote to the masses. That family is the answer. Family is the key, right? Under God's leadership, under the guise of the lordship of the Lord Jesus Christ. We got to say, listen, the antidote to hundreds of kids running around in Chicago is fathers, my guy. Is fathers, right? The antidote to kids in the school to prison pipeline, so to speak, are more fathers at home supporting their children. Thomas Sowell said this, man. He said, listen, I don't care how much money you pour into education. If there's not folks at home making children go to bed on time, feeding them, making sure they have what they need, getting them up on time, making them do their homework, I don't care how much money you pour into education, you're not going to close any kind of educational academic gap.
Absolutely.
It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Absolutely.
So again, it goes back to the family. I'll even go back to Lyndon B. Johnson's statement. Listen, unless we endeavor to do, to robustly feed and fuel the family, the thriving of the family, society is going to decay. Right. And so I like the big homie Delano Squires. He and I had a chance to have lunch together a month ago. And, he and I talked about how, he was saying, and I quoted him in the book, how he said, listen, we're talking about any and everything in barbershop. We're talking about game, we're talking about who the GOAT is, which is a relevant conversation, by the way.
Very much so.
We're talking about the GOAT. We're talking about this, we're talking about that. But we're not, we need to have just as robust, an energy around in our community. When we see the family is hurting and father absence rates are hurting and it's at a crisis level, we need to have robust conversations about the importance of marriage. Right. So I think, again, we start with the church. We go from the church to taking God's idea and God's kingdom to the masses. Right. And we have these robust, community kinds of conversations amongst people. We have to have people who role model. I had role models that I saw who were modeling marriage, man, and making marriage something beautiful. Making family something beautiful. Fathers in the saddle, something beautiful with the, present active assistant. Fathers in the home, something beautiful, right? Let's get back to that. We have to not be ashamed to say, listen, God's way of doing things is, listen. So here's the what many of the think tanks, I got this from Larry Elder as well, and I started delving into it and saying, wow, that's a thing. So think tanks on both the political left and the political right all say the same thing. They say, listen, if you graduate from high school, at least graduate from high school, you do not have children before you get married. Mm-hmm. Right? At least graduate from high school. Don't have children before you get married. Get a job, man. Right? Don't quit that job before you get another one. Most people who do that have no problems in America, virtually speaking, that most folks are not in poverty, right? You set yourself up to have a family sort of, a family framework, you know what I'm saying? You haven't had kids out of wedlock, so you set yourself up to do some good things. And so that's, they call it the millennial success sequence. We got to talk about stuff like that. How God's ethic for, a sexual ethic. We've got to turn the volume up on God's sexual ethic, man, and combat these ideas that's coming through pop culture. We've got to say, get away from the ratchetness. Look and point to the real impact of what that does to our community. Like, look, you can talk about this stuff all day. Talk about how, giving away, these sexual escapades and, you vote and we can get it on. Well, listen, yeah, you can talk about that, but you're fueling the father absence, pathology by doing that. But if you change your mindset, think about this. We talked about in 2 decades how father absence went from 25% to 75% just in 2 decades. I wonder what would happen in just 2 decades if we had key people who were modeling and key voices in our generation, key voices and individuals who were turning this thing around and let's down with ratchetness, up with righteousness. You know what I'm saying? And, down with righteousness, up with righteousness. And we had key individuals who were doing it. And we militaristically, we're marching to the beat of that drum. I wonder what would happen in 2 decades if key individuals, if we as a people, and okay, so we can do that at a community level, but I wonder if at a cultural level, we stop promoting the artists who are promoting ratchetness, and we had artists who were promoting a public responsibility, relationship responsibility, sexual responsibility. You know what I'm saying? I wonder if we had that. What would happen? What would happen if your favorite artist said it was cool to do your homework and pull your pants up? I wonder what would happen. You know what I'm saying? In 2 decades, what would happen? Like, we could cut that rate in half. We could cut poverty in half. We would see what we were seeing in the 1920s and 30s when Black poverty was on the decline. We can go right back to that. We could. I really believe that. And so we're the ones who are saying, yo, we have a high view of our people. We believe in Black efficacy. And then they're looking at us saying, you racist and you sympathizing with white supremacy because you're talking about hard work and you're talking about whiteness and you're invoking logical thought and personal responsibility and all these things, right? Hard work, anyway. So to answer your question, Mo, I think it starts with the church and us mobilizing God's message about the kingdom of God and his way of doing things, mobilizing that into the culture, and modeling it, exemplifying it, having robust conversations around it, mentoring people, going to the schools, mentoring. I love what Governor Ron DeSantis is doing down in Florida. He had the Responsible Fatherhood Act. He was putting money where his mouth is. He was saying, listen, let's put some funding. Now, again, that's not to say let's depend upon government, but what I'm saying is if government's going to get involved anyway, then they should get involved at a level that says instead of pouring money into crime remediation, instead of pouring money, this is not a defund the police message, but you're going to have to put money into jails, prisons, so forth and so on because of father absence, because that's going to fuel your prisons. Well, why don't you put some money in like this ounce of cure is better than a pound of cure is better than an ounce of remedy. Oh, how did I get that messed up? Anyway, so why don't you put some funds and effort and energy into helping young fathers become responsible fathers? You know what I'm saying? Why don't you put some funds into that? Because guess what? You're going to pay less money for that than you're going to pay for what's going to impact the community when people are drive-by shooting and all of that jazz.
Unless there's an ulterior motive and the drive-by shooting and the keeping the kids in jail is actually working to benefit some.
That's a whole other conversation.
It is a whole other conversation.
That's a whole other conversation.
For everybody who's watched, and been with us for a while, our conversation with Pastor Alton was along this same vein, and the work that he's doing down in Birmingham with Black men and Black families and encouraging, the couples in his church to actually get married. And what does it mean to be married? And why has God instituted the marriage, and the unit of marriage and things like that. And so, I just wanted to, if you haven't seen that episode with Alton, Alton Hardy, from last year, go back and watch it, because he's talking about these exact same things in regards to, what happens when you actually bring a couple together and what is the fruit of marriage.
Yes. I saw that episode. And by the way, I actually wanted to send him a copy of my book as well, because when I saw that episode, I was real inspired by what he was talking about. And I wanted to send that resource to him.
Yeah, do that.
Yes. Kevin, you got something else? Because
I will say that this was a great way to come back. That's all I'll say.
Right.
I think this is the biggest topic and the biggest thing affecting the Black community. When we started this podcast, it was to talk about issues within the Black community from a biblical worldview. This is the number one issue.
Amen.
That is affecting the community. Everything else springs from this.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
We could take it one back further and say, the church is the number one issue, and everything funnels out of the breakdown of the church. But then you have to break down the family and all these things. But when we talk about all these issues we keep pointing at, and the media is pointing at, and all these activists are pointing at, the issue isn't that they see these issues that are present. It is their solutions to them, right? Yeah. Critical race theory and making white people go with their privilege won't change a single thing in the hood. It just won't.
Listen, reparations ain't gonna change a single.
It won't change a thing. Right. It'll be a lot of rims on cars and sweet paint jobs,
but give every person $50,000, and if you still ain't got no fathers in the home, it's still gonna be a ratchet situation.
Exactly. I'll take that 50. I need that. I can use that.
Hey, I ain't gonna say I'm gonna send the check back. What I'm saying is,
I'm just saying.
Yeah. So
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just saying. Yeah. So when we start to think about these issues, the solutions that the general public and the general media puts out there just aren't any real solutions. First of all, they misdiagnose what the problem is, and by misdiagnosing the problem, they come up with bad solutions.
Absolutely.
They sound good. They make us feel good because, number one, it makes somebody else responsible for us, for our issues. But if somebody else is responsible for your issues, then they also control whether you overcome those issues.
Absolutely.
But when you look at the issues and you realize there's something I can do about it, there's something that we can do about it, that's empowering. And that's what people need to hear and need to understand. Stop being ratchet, take responsibility, get married, stop, the sleeping around and the creating baby mamas. And if I'm gonna say this to my ladies, because we're talking about fathers, ladies, if he is not, if you know he trash, don't sleep with him. Right. That's all I'm gonna say.
Right.
Because if you don't want your son to be like him, or you wouldn't want him to raise your kid, don't sleep with him. You know, because we got to change. We got to be blunt. We got to be upfront, and we got to say, you know, it's time for us to look in the mirror and do something different. If you out there, you know, Pookie ain't no good. He ain't got no job. Why you choosing him? Yeah. Why are you choosing it? You know, choose somebody, choose a man who is willing to marry you and build something with you. Yep. And when you do that, when we start do that, things will change. Until then, I don't care who you vote for. I don't care what kind of anti-racism policies they put in, all this nonsense. Nothing's going to change. If you still come up with all these single parent homes, 72% born out of wedlock, all of these numbers, it's just, nothing's going to change. So that's all I'll say when it comes to, you know, fatherless homes.
I say if you wouldn't want to spend the rest of your life with that person, don't sleep with them. If you ain't thinking like, this is my husband, don't. And if he's not willing to put a ring on your finger, not just talk about, you know, baby, we're gonna get married, how long y'all been having that conversation?
Right. If marriage is not his hustle, you know what I'm saying? If he ain't grinding to put that ring on the finger and said, okay, here's the plan. If there's no plan, like, look, let's keep it moving. Let's keep it moving. You know, because otherwise what we're doing is, again, fueling what we're seeing right now in our culture. And again, the thing that grips my heart is when we talk about one of the number one things, you know, that impacts the Black community is when we look at the crime rates, right? We look at the crime rates, and we hate to just all Black on Black crime, but I'm just talking about that. What we're saying is, listen, in our community, 52% of the nation's homicides are committed by 13% of its people. Mm-hmm. And look at the connection we have here. 72% of those people are growing up with no dads. 80% of the people in prison had no dads, right? And look, 36% of all of the abortion rates are done on 7% of the population, Black women, right? And again, go back to the foundational statistic, 70 to 75% of those people growing up without dads. That would not be the case if we had fathers in the saddle.
Yep. Man, this has been such a good conversation. I am so thankful that one, that Off Code is back, but two, Brian, that you were able to join us. I want to let everybody know that in our fall book groups, we're actually going to be going through your book, Missing Pillars. And because this is just a book that everyone should read. Anyone who is, you know, on the fence of, well, you know, they just say Black fathers, but Black fathers are really there, or, you know, I don't really know what to think about Black dads in the home and things like that. Having the tool, which is your book, to be able to give people the information on Black dads and the missing pillars and why we're seeing the issues that we're seeing in the Black community. This is the book for you. This is the place to start. And so in the fall, when we announce our fall book groups, Brian's book will be there. Please join and jump into this conversation so that you can also be a part of the solution by reading the book.
Absolutely. And in the meantime, our spring book club's registration just opened. So we got 3 great books for the spring semester. Go look and sign up.
So thank you. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you might want to lead your own book group, Brian. I don't know. It's your book. If the Lord stir your heart, I'm just saying.
That'd be dope. Well, listen, guys, let me say again, thank you so much. I appreciate you all. And I'm honored that you all brought me on your platform to talk about this very important topic, that you saw that, that the topic was important enough and salient enough for conversation that it should be had, is one that should be had. And I feel like I'm joining a couple cousins that I just ain't seen in a minute. You know what I'm saying? You know, I just feel like, we just jump right in the saddle and just be like, look, we picked up from where we left off. I felt like I was with y'all the whole time. You know?
Exactly.
Definitely fan.
Sorry, Kevin. I didn't mean to speak over.
No, go ahead.
Brian, how can people stay in contact with you? How can they order Missing Pillars? Like, put it all out there so we know.
Yeah, absolutely. So you had it flashed on the screen, but if you go to bookbaby.com and search for Missing Pillars, bookbaby.com is the publishing platform, and you do a search for Missing Pillars. If you Googled, Missing Pillars author Brian K. Shannon, the book is going to come up, but it's bookbaby.com is where the platform is where you can purchase it. No, it's not on Amazon or whatever. Let me just tell you a little tidbit. As I'm an independent author at this moment, and independent authors don't make a dime from like folks like Amazon and so forth. So I'm with a company that specializes with independent authors, and so I get more a return on my book if you purchase from them. So again, Missing Pillars, bookbaby.com, and so you can contact me or you can connect with me on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and type in Pastor Brian Shannon sermon, you can see what I got going on, other podcasts that I've been a part of, and discussing my book and sermons out there I'm preaching. You can go to Facebook. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Brian Shannon. You can contact me, missingpillars@gmail.com. If you're trying to get at me, if you want to know more about speaking engagements and talks and conferences and things like that, because I do travel here and there to do presentations and talks and ministry and engagements and whatnot. So I love to be a part of doing the work. So to speak, the real work of ministry. The work is the work of ministry,
yes.
Of spreading God's word and presenting God's perspective and God's kingdom as it relates to the things of life. So praise God for that.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
All right.
Well, Brian, man, I appreciate it, man. This has been good. Yeah. Maybe next time we have you on, we can have a whole, discussion about the GOAT and all of those things. Because the thing is, we agree, so it won't be like a debate show or anything like that. But we'll just be putting the truth, kind of like this. We'll just be putting the truth out there.
Putting the truth out there, baby.
I'm going to go ahead and get some other guys together, and I'm going to sit out that show. Because if we're not talking about like dance or shopping, I can't really. Yeah.
Can't relate.
Can't relate. I'm not there. But we would definitely love to have you back. I do think, you guys comment or send us a message. Let us know if y'all think a all male show would be something y'all be privy to or, appreciate. All right. We're out of here. Bye, you guys.
Bye.